While talking about abstract themes or character archetypes can be fun, I wanted to talk about a weapon again because the weapons is what launched this series in the first place. During my researches, I noticed one very specific weapon archetype that surprisingly returned more often than I thought. An archetype that, for lack of a better term, we're gonna call the burning curved sword. The first weapon of this kind was Dark Souls 1's Quelag Fury Sword, the boss weapon of the eponym character. It was obtained by ascending any +10 curved sword or curved greatsword with Quelag's soul at the giant blacksmith of Aner Londo. It had relatively weak physical damages compensated by a decent dexterity scaling and very high innate fire damages. Just like chaos-infused weapons, it had the particularity of receiving a damage bonus based on your current humanity level. As a design, the weapon kinda resembled the claw of an insect, which makes sense given that demons and just the children of chaos in general tend to look like insects or have insect body parts on them. What made the weapon visually stand out was that a fire-based special effect activated every time you swung it, making it overall very flashy, in a good way. Also, we've already talked about Quelag on this channel, but we're gonna do it again. Quelag was one of the daughters of Chaos of the Witch of Izalith, one of the 4 primordial lords alongside Gwyn, Nito, and the furtive pygmy. The Witch of Izalith noticed before everyone else that the first flame was getting weaker over time, and so, she tried to seek for a way to replace it. She knew that her own lord's soul, the Chaos Soul, was a source of life just like the first flame and thought that she could use that soul to recreate the first flame or at least create a good enough replacement for it. The result of this experiment was catastrophic to say the least, as it sparked the birth of the Chaos Flame, a source of life, yes, but a wild one that cannot be controlled unlike the first flame. And from the Chaos Flame, the entire race of the demons was born, while the daughters of chaos mutated into half-witches half-demons monstrosities. Which is why, when we encounter Quelag, she's a horrifying mix of a spider-looking monster surmounted by the original upper half of her body, kinda like a centaur. But unlike a centaur, the spider isn't just an extension of Quelag's body. We can see that the spider and Quelag appears to be 2 distinct entities sharing one body. We even see Quelag giving orders to the spider with taps on her head in the animation of some of her attacks. The beautiful femme fatale whose outside beauty hides an inner monster is an old classic trope in literature, which would apply to Quelag if we saw her human side first and then her spider side second. But here it's the opposite. We first see the grotesque and monstrous spider and then Quelag's beautiful side is revealed. Opposite presentation means an opposite message, and instead of her character being a beautiful woman hiding a monster, it's instead a monster hiding a pretty, gentle human nature. Pretty clever storytelling using nothing but camera angles, to be honest. Its spiritual successor would appear in Dark Souls 3, with another boss weapon. The Demon Scar, obtained from the Demon Prince boss fight. It was obtained from the soul of the Demon Prince, and had the particularity of being actually just a flame shaped like a curved sword. It dealt no physical damages whatsoever, only pure fire damages that scaled on your faith and intelligence, just like the fire damages of chaos-infused weapons in Dark Souls 3. It also had the interesting property of being both a weapon and a pyromancy flame for players. This weapon had no heavy attack in its moveset. Using the heavy attack button would instead use the pyromancy equipped in your current spell slot, making it a pretty interesting weapon to use for pyromancy builds. The Demon Prince is an interesting case within the lore of the demons in Dark Souls. We learn from his soul a detail about the birth of demons I mentioned earlier, quote,
"The demons, birthed from a common chaos, share almost everything between them, even the pride of their prince, and his nearly faded flame. So that the last demon standing may rekindle it."
Basically, the game is telling us that the Demon Prince is also an unkindled one for the Chaos Flame, just like the player character is unkindled for the first flame. I've said before that many bosses in Dark Souls 3 present mirrors to the player, and the demon prince couldn't be more on the nose, as he is literally the demon equivalent of the Ashen One. It makes sense then that he is presented as a prince and not a king. First of all, because we already faced a demon king in the main game, so that would be redundant, but also because of what a prince would represent in that context. Historically, a prince is a potential successor to the crown, the next in line to lead a kingdom, a people, and so, a lot of pressure comes with being a prince who have a lot of standards to live up to, and represent all the hopes of his people, hopes for a brighter, more prosperous future. And indeed, the demon prince is the last of his kind. If he fail here, his entire race is annihilated. So when one of the two demons rises to enter his second phase as Demon Prince, he represents all of the hopes, prides and responsibilities of the demon folks. All of that pressure suddenly fall on his shoulders. The pressure is reinforced when you remember that demons share everything, including their memories. At this point, he is not just the prince and future leader of the demon race, he becomes the demon race, the entire race represented by a single avatar, in a last struggle, desperate to survive. A collective consciousness in a single body. If he succeed, he will rekindle the chaos flame and revive his race, starting the demon's long-awaited age of chaos, and will ascend to the title of Demon King. But if he fail, none of that will happen and he will die a mere prince. But unfortunately for him, he is a boss in a Dark Souls video game. Failure is inherent to his nature. The last weapon to fit this archetype is the Magma Blade of Elden Ring, a weapon associated with the man-serpents that lurks around the volcano manor. We learn from its description that it was actually made by the man-serpents from the lava of Mount Gelmir, adding that it was impossible for normal humans to make it. And that's sorta it. Since this weapon isn't associated with a boss but a regular enemy, there's obviously less to talk about. Still, the man-serpents are associated with the god-devouring serpent who ate Rykard, so it's not totally far-fetched to imagine that they descend directly from him.
Spirit of a deformed man-serpent that wields a whip of magma. It is said that long ago, the elder serpent that dwelled on Mount Gelmir devoured a demigod, and the birth of the man-serpents followed.
I like the use of the term, elder serpent, as it implies that the god-devouring serpent was just the oldest member of that race, before Rykard's arrival. Regardless, these man-serpents are intelligent beings, capable of forging their own weapons, as seen with the Magma Blade, the Magma Whip Candlestick or the man-serpent's shield, all three of which appear to have been forged directly by them using the lava of Mount Gelmir. All of this makes me tend to believe that the serpents, and their culture, predate by far the arrival of Rykard on Mount Gelmir, as well as their mutation from serpents to man-serpents. This theory is reinforced by the fact that none of the weapons in the man-serpent's arsenal ever seem to reference Rykard, always just them and Mount Gelmir. So perhaps Rykard, when he was still a humanoid demigod, ventured to Mount Gelmir, and learned the magma hexes magic from the serpents, instead of them learning it from him, hexes that he later adapted into what we know today as the magma glintstone sorcery. All of this in exchange for building them a home, the volcano manor. This isn't speculation, this is stated as fact by the descriptions of two magma sorcery spells, Roiling Magma and Magma Shot. Both of these spells state this, at the end of their description, quote,
After discovering the ancient hexes of Gelmir, Rykard, son of Queen Renala, brought them back into practical use as new forms of sorcery.
Overall, the Magma Blade isn't that interesting by itself, however it is a small piece, a small part of the history and culture of an entire race, a race of intelligent, magic-wielding serpents, who had a mutually beneficial relationship with a demigod. And the result of that relationship was the mutation between serpent and man, the man-serpent. A hybrid that managed to keep the best of both worlds. Since they were able to wield magic, we know that the original serpents had an at least human-like intelligence, so obviously the man-serpent hybrid kept the intelligence of both species. They also gained legs and arms from humans, allowing them to now create and use tools and weapons, and build massive constructions to further show off and defend their culture. They gained these limbs whilst keeping a mostly serpentine body shape that allow them, once again, to get the best of both worlds, of a serpentine body type on one hand and a humanoid body type on the other. The burning curved sword is an interesting weapon. It only appeared thrice in the Soul series, but it was always linked to the history of an entire race, separate from humans. On one hand you have the demons, born from a failed experiment, but still developed their own pride, their own culture and history. On the other, you have the man-serpents of Elden Ring, who are hybrids, also born from somewhat of an experiment, the mutually beneficial relationship between the oldest and wisest of their serpent race, and the very ambitious demigod, Rykard. Both races are unnatural, both races were born from an experiment started by a divine entity, but both races took pride in that part of their history, and developed their own language, identity, and culture. One race had a mostly tragic history, and an extremely sad downfall, the other is still going, thriving in a prosperous environment, just chilling and living their life, isolated on Mount Gelmir. And I think the one key difference between the two was that the demons were born out of desperation. The first flame was fading, a solution had to be found as quickly as possible, and the witch tried to replace it with her chaos flame while Gwyn used himself as kindling to become the first Lord of Cinder. The man-serpents on the other hand, were born out of ambition, and the isolation on Mount Gelmir meant they were also isolated from the War of the Shattering. Without any reason to be rushed, this explained why the creation of the man-serpents was much more successful and stable than the demons, much less chaotic. As often, I started writing this video not expecting much from this weapon archetype, but by diving deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole of lore, I learned some very interesting trivias, that I hope you enjoyed as well.